This is the On the Pony Express podcast, part of the On3 network. Check out all the SMU coverage you need at ontheponyexpress.com. Now, here's your host, Billy Embody.
1, 2, 3, let me go.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast. We've got a jam-packed show for you guys today. We'll talk to Hayden Howerton, previewing SMU's angle of the matchup with BYU, and he'll also answer questions from our ontheponyexpress.com subscribers. Go to ontheponyexpress.com today and join us on the message board. Save $30 a year when you get an annual subscription to ontheponyexpress.com, the best message board in the entire SMU market, with the most amount of coverage as well, I'll add. Before we get to Hayden Howerton, as well as Mitch Harper of KSL Sports, who covers the Cougars, we are presented by our friends at StatusJet, statusjet.com. Reach out to David Henry and his team today and talk about what the rest of SMU football season can look like for you. They have an incredible array of offerings when it comes to big planes, small planes. They have all of the potential costs for you to do this for game day for the Mustangs already worked out. Their estimates for you and a group of friends or family to fly to go see the Mustangs, and you can do it with a level of luxury when you fly private with StatusJet. Code PonyUpACC for a discount on your round trip flight. Reach out to them, talk about the options you have when it comes to flying private. It might work out best for you. So give them a call. They are official sponsors of SMU Athletics. They're also proud supporters of the On the Pony Express podcast. And before we get to our interview with Hayden Howerton and our chat there, we also want to remind you that we are presented by our friends at AKM Turf and Greens. AKMTurfandGreens.com is where you can find a huge array of their own work, whether it be schools, major projects. They did all new hitting mats at some golf driving ranges across the area lately. And they also can renovate your backyard experience into what you, your family, your friends, your children deserve, which is top of the line turf. And you can change it into a putting green, a chipping green, all of those things in your backyard, whether it's a small area that you really are tired of all the weeds and maintenance. They can handle that for you and take that off your hands. You can email them info@akmturfandgreens.com. And they're also offering $500 off your project today when you reach out with the code PONYUP. So change your backyard into the backyard of your dreams at akmturfandgreens.com, whether it's poolside or just an overall backyard makeover. AKM Turf and Greens can do it all for you. So without further ado, here we go. On to previewing SMU-BYU with Hayden Howerton. Welcome back to the On the Pony Express podcast. Billy Embody, now joined by former SMU offensive lineman Hayden Howerton. We are here to preview SMU-BYU Friday night, 6 p.m. Central, ESPN2 in Ford Stadium. Hayden, thanks for the time as always. Let's start with this. The Friday night or Saturday night nationally televised matchup is there's got to be that extra juice, deep down that you've got to corral for a game like this.
No doubt. When you're on ESPN 1 or 2 or whatever, when you get that nighttime matchup, the lights come on, it just adds a little bit extra oomph to the matchup, if you will. It's always something you want to play well, but when you've got millions of viewers, you especially want to play well, because you also know when NFL teams are traveling, they're going to turn on the game at the hotel, and, you're going to have just a little bit of extra eyes on you from a scouting perspective. So big game for sure. I'm excited to see what the Ponies can do on national television and show out against the BYU Cougars.
Keys to the game for this one early on is, for me, I'm watching, and you are too. SMU has not beaten BYU in the history of the program. So you're trying to do something that's never been done. And now each team is different. Each journey is different for each team, different players. And SMU has totally changed its program from when it lost in the New Mexico Bowl against BYU the last time on that 2-point conversion. But BYU is still a very physical football team, and SMU is going to have to bring it, especially in the trenches in this matchup early and often.
I'd agree. I think BYU is a very underrated football program this year. I see the Vegas line is like 4.5 wins. I just don't see that happening. I think BYU is always going to be a team that is very mature, both physically and emotionally, and they're always going to be a competitor, man. They're never going to win 2 or 11 games. They're always going to be right in that 8, that 6 to 10 zone, just because that's how they do their football. They run the ball a lot. They're built to play from ahead. And so my keys to the game, man, they're going to have to be the most physical team out there. SMU is going to have to go take it from them. BYU is not going to roll over and give it to them. That offensive line is going to have to play really well against a big front for BYU. Part of the reason they're so big is because of their beliefs, that these players are much older. There's a 23-year-old sophomore on their offensive line. I can't imagine still playing college football at 25 years old, but
Be great.
It would be awesome. But another key, you got to keep BYU's offense off the field. BYU had 39 minutes of possession last week. That's military academy numbers, where SMU is going to have to score every time they get the ball, because BYU is one of those teams that's going to go on 8-minute drives capped off with a 1-yard touchdown run. So it's one of those things where we're going to have to take advantage of every time that we have the ball, and defense is going to have to force 3 and outs, and they're going to have to get 4th down stops, because BYU lives in that 3rd and short / going for it on 4th down. And then finally, we're going to have to win our one-on-one battles. That's the key to every football game, is 11 one-on-one matchups. But I think BYU is going to be the most talented team we see so far this year. And they have some great players. Elijah Roberts, he's going to be going against 6th-year senior right tackle Brandon Kime. Great football player, 3rd team preseason All Big 12. The wide receivers are going to be going against a lockdown corner and Jacob Richardson. And then our offensive line is going to be going against Tyler Batty, who's a preseason all-conference defensive end for BYU. So it's going to be a great matchup. It's going to be a great measuring stick for us, certainly a better one than the last 2 weeks have been. And we're going to be able to see really where the program is at.
We talk about starting fast, and this is a game that when I look at the quarterback position, Jake Retzlaff is still kind of growing into himself as a quarterback. This will be his 6th career start. He had a huge outing against Southern Illinois, for a BYU quarterback in particular in this day and age, is pretty impressive. But for SMU, they need to get a fast start out of their quarterbacks. Each game this year has been a slow start. And whether it means the defense has to be out there longer, or whether it means, the offense just kind of gets that antsiness that we talked about earlier this week, this is the week that they have to kick down that door. And if Preston doesn't, since he's the starter, then we're going to see the rotation. And who knows from there whether Kevin takes it or if they keep rotating. And then it becomes this thing. They've got to start fast offensively this week.
For sure. When you have a team like BYU who's built to play from ahead, like I already talked about, great secondary, good pass rushers, good O-line, it's going to be really hard if we look up in late the 3rd quarter and we're down by, more than 1 score, to be able to come back, crawl into this ball game and get the dub. So SMU is going to have to go on the offensive, play it from ahead. We're going to need Preston to get going early, get his first completion, so we can get that confidence on Friday night to where he'll get rolling. So we need guys to be able to go out there on the receiving end and be able to take the top off the defense. We need some chunk plays every now and then to be able to play from ahead and set us up in the red zone, and then we're able to roll from there. But even if Preston doesn't come out early, I don't think we can wait 2 series to see Kevin Jennings. I think it might be a shorter leash of a week for Preston, to where, hey, if the first series we go 3 and out, we might need to see Kevin early just to see if he's got something for us. Because if this game doesn't go how we want early in the first quarter, it's going to be tough. But I do think after this past week that they both have some confidence and should have some confidence going into this game. I think this is the most talented SMU quarterback room that they've had in a long time. I anticipate them starting fast, but you obviously have to have a backup plan in case something doesn't go your way.
You mentioned Tyler Batty. They also have Isaiah Bagna, another big guy on the defensive line. And with the offensive line having that last week's outing that they did on the ground, like we talked about, very impressive to get 369 yards on the ground. They're going to face a more formidable front this week. Not one that is, I would say, overly big and huge in the middle compared to some of the other BYU teams. Like maybe we're starting to see some of those COVID year, 30-year-olds roll off or something a little bit. But, the whole defensive line is good for BYU. But the interior of this SMU offensive line, I feel like going into the season, especially with what the offensive line looked like week 1 or week 0 was going to be the strength. Like I felt like with Logan Parr and Ben Sparks and Savion Byrd and Ja'Kai Clark and Justin Osborne in the middle at the time, I felt like the run game up the middle was going to be, pretty solid for SMU. I'd like to see Brashard Smith hit some quick hitters, get them going north and south, and start to establish that run early. And if LJ Johnson can go, that can be another physical option for them as well.
I think so too, man. You got to get your inside zone going, and then you got to sprinkle in a little bit of outside zone with that. I mean, if we're able to get some of our powers where we're pulling the guards up on these linebackers, get our double teams going, and really able to roll these guys off the ball, we're going to have a lot more success. Unfortunately, what's going to make that difficult is this defensive line coach. He teaches these guys a little bit more of an old school technique. They're going to four-point stance. They're going to come off almost in a frog, super low. In short yardage, they're going to submarine and just try to create a pile for the linebackers to step up and make a play. And then in the passing game, we're going to get a lot of bull rushes in the middle, and this is not a quarterback contained bull rush where they're rushing with their eyes up. This is you're going to see the top of their head. They're going to do everything they can just to push the pocket backwards. So I anticipate seeing a lot of traps, a lot of times where SMU guys are going to set and then knock their arms down, and then the BYU guys will fall straight on their face. So you're going to have to play a little bit of a different game because that's what BYU is going to force you into. But as far as running the football, once we get the pass game going and we're going to take them out of that run first mentality on defense, it'll be a little more balanced and we'll be able to run the football a little better.
Jacob Richardson, when you plan for a guy that's good, a Jim Thorpe Award semifinalist, I mean, unless you have a first-round draft pick like a Rashee Rice or a Cortland Sutton, you don't want to say do you go at him? Do you test him early? Like, what's your strategy if you were Rhett Lashley and company going after a guy like that?
I mean, we played against Sauce Gardner, at Cincinnati, and he was a freak. He had super long arms, 6'2". I mean, that's what a NFL corner is supposed to be built like. Jacob, I don't think he's quite that size. He doesn't have quite those attributes. But with a lockdown corner like that, I would say we just got to get him going early. We got to get our receivers as far as spreading the ball around. I don't know if you want to put one guy on him all night, and really defense is the one dictating that. They're going to put Richardson on whoever they feel like our number one wide receiver is. So we need somebody other than RJ Maryland to be able to throw the ball to really set up the rest of this season as well. RJ has been a great threat for us in the passing game, but we need a receiver, whether that's Jake Bailey or Hudson or whoever to get going so that we can have more success later this season. So they're not having a game plan on one wide receiver or pass threat.
And that looks like a good group of safeties for BYU as well. Talon Alfrey was talking with the media this week. It seemed very smart. That's kind of what you expect from a BYU team. Just a lot of mature individuals on this team that, obviously from an age perspective, but just kind of how they live their life. They're going to be disciplined. They're going to stick to their assignments for the most part. And obviously the last time SMU faced them, they were down Rashee Rice. Jalen Thomas was out. It was a different situation. SMU was even at one point almost out of running backs. This is still a different SMU football team. They're healthy for the most part. I really want to see this offense get some things moving against BYU, just to build that confidence into this, beginning of this stretch of, strong competition, at least, on paper.
Right. And I think we got to be okay with the 3-yard runs and the 8-yard passes. We're just going to have to put together, 10, 12 play drives capped off with a touchdown. We're not going to settle for field goals in this game and be able to win. So we're going to need to be able to put together those long drives, wear down the defense, kind of attack those over the middle throws, and be able to put together a drive that way. As far as the maturity goes, was talking with some of the players that played in the New Mexico Bowl, and what's funny is during the celebration where you get both teams together and you kind of have a dinner that, a couple days before the bowl game, all the SMU guys are just hanging out and all the BYU guys are bringing their wives and kids. So they are legitimately a lot more mature emotionally than maybe we are at this point.
I mean, to be that focused on college football with a wife and kids, I mean, credit to them because, I know I got a laundry list of things to do for my family during college football season. So when BYU has the ball, they do have that ability to run it down your throat, 179 yards on 49 carries. So not necessarily the best clip especially against like a Southern Illinois, but that commitment to run that much is something that you've got to pay attention to. Like you mentioned earlier with the tempo that BYU operates with, I think I looked today, they were around 103rd in the country in plays per minute. SMU's like right around 30, 31. So it's a vast difference in terms of what you're going to see as far as trying to build time of possession and things like that. And that's where I circle back to SMU's offense. They've got to hold up their end of the bargain because, Red has said this in the past, tempo really only works when you're not going 3 and out. So they're going to have to establish those drives because BYU's trying to wear you down and have those long, methodical drives.
Yeah, the BYU offense is death by 1,000 cuts. So they're going to run the ball 49 times. I mean, do you know how much toughness it takes to A, run the ball 50 times a game, and to B, defend running the ball 50 times a game? I mean, you're going to need a bunch of guys to play on defense for us. We're going to need to keep guys fresh. We're going to need all of the defensive line room to be able to go and play at a high level for that. I will say they gave up 2 sacks last week to Southern Illinois, so that is something. If they do have to get into a passing game, I think we're able to get home. I think we're going to be able to hammer the quarterback and maybe throw him off and only his 6th career start. And that's what it's going to take, is for us to get home early and have him looking over his shoulder a little bit at hopefully a big Elijah Roberts sack that gets us going.
Yeah, I think for me, this BYU offense is I was talking with some BYU people as well this week. They feel better about Jake Retzlaff than they did going into this season. Just from his week 1 performance. They do have Jerry Bohannon, who I feel like has been in college football for a decade as well. I've covered him as a recruit. He was at Arkansas. He was at USF. He's been all over the place, Baylor. What a run for him. But Retzlaff is kind of that pocket passer. He is not going to run the ball much at all. And we talked about it earlier this week with Houston Christian's quarterback. I feel like these pocket passers against these teams that aren't, just Tyler Shug, of Louisville level, SMU can tee off, and it's got to be something they can take advantage of.
Yeah, and it comes down to winning on 1st and 2nd down. You got to keep them in that 3rd and 5 plus, where they're going to drop back, and he's not really going to be a threat to take off like our quarterbacks are going to be. So it really makes that offense one-dimensional when you're just defending the pass. Now, obviously, I'm not an expert in all the cover 2 Tampa, your cover 4s, maybe you get into some robber a little bit, but I know he's going to draw up some great defenses. I know he's got a really nasty plan coming up for this week, and I have a lot of confidence that defensively they're going to be able to get it done.
If there's one thing I've learned over the last 2 years covering this football team is that you've got to have confidence in Scott Simons. That first year he had to revamp, a personnel, group, and we saw what that could turn into when they get the right guys in there. I think they have the right guys in there. There's some positions that maybe don't look like an ACC team just yet, but one area that does is the defensive line, and another area that does is the safety group. And those linebackers, even, they're physical. They're just kind of sawed off, productive machines. And if you can get that production from that front 7, it's going to maybe mask the development that's still happening in the cornerback room.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you're going to have a little bit of safety help. It's just going to depend what they're going to come out in for BYU, what kind of personnel. I don't think they're a team that's going to come out in 4 and 5 wide all the time. I think they're going to live kind of in that 11, 12, 21 personnel world, and they're going to run the ball first. And then when they've got to, they're going to try to take some deep shots. Now, I'm saying this after he threw for 348 yards last week. They were extremely explosive, 20 for 30, so only 20 completions. And 348 yards with 3 touchdowns. So they obviously have that ability, but Scott Simons has done a great job. It was a revolving door at defensive coordinator at my time at SMU. So it's a breath of fresh air to see him really go to work and get this team rolling.
What do you think as far as prediction goes for this one? I'm still trying to decide. So I will probably tack a score on here in a second, but I know you've got your answer well thought out.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on this. Vegas has the odds. I think it has SMU at 11.5 right now, which unfortunately I think is too big of a spread. I don't think SMU is going to cover the spread. I think that this is going to be a closer game than we think. I think it might come down to the very last possession. And at the end of the day, this is a payback game for the 2022 New Mexico Bowl. SMU needs to come out and remember what that felt like after that first season, because, man, losing that last game of the season leaves you with that sour taste in your mouth. And we still have a little bit of that from last year's Fenway Bowl. Now, a 22-degree game in the high desert, that's BYU's specialty. They're coming to Dallas, against a much better SMU team. We're more mature than we were 2 years ago. I think we're way more talented, better coaching, all that. But BYU always scares me. Like we've already hit on. I don't mean to beat a dead horse. Very mature. They don't ride the roller coaster. And that being said, I think SMU is going to get it done. 38-31 is my prediction. I think both teams are going to be able to score offensively. I just think it's going to come down to who's got the ball at the end. Now, there's going to be a much bigger task after this game, after the bye. We've got the Horned Frogs coming to town, but you cannot look ahead. This is one of those games that if you mess around early, BYU will beat you. So we can't be distracted. Friday night game, red jerseys. There's a long month ahead after this. But you just got to take it 1 week at a time, and I do see us getting it done. But win by 1, win by 100. I don't care about all the spread stuff. I just want to see the Ponies come out with a W.
I'm going to go lower scoring game. I think the tempo of BYU will have something to do with that. I do think we're going to see them establish a drive here and there that is your typical 10, 12 play, 80-yard drive, and people are going to be, throwing their remotes at the TV and things like that. But I think SMU's offense, if it's not working with Preston Stone, if they'll go to Kevin, and I think it can work. I think Preston can come out and start fast this week, though. I've watched them kind of continue to kind of grind through this, and I think I do think they've held some things back offensively. We kind of saw them get into some different RJ Maryland type of looks in the second half against Nevada. I think they're going to use him either as a total decoy, which they've done at times, or he's going to have a huge game. Brashard Smith can have a good game as well, and that'll help Preston kind of settle down a little bit. I think this is one of those special games for him. He can build some confidence and get off to the right start. And, with that, if Kevin ends up playing, he ends up playing. But if Preston starts fast, that's going to be a good thing for SMU. They're going to be able to get on top a little bit early. And that's going to be the key to beating BYU. I don't think a comeback situation is much fun when they can kind of establish their culture, their will on SMU. I don't view this as like the Nevada game where there's that opportunity to have a fourth quarter comeback. I just think BYU can kind of grind you down. And if they're in that position, you're going to be on the tough side of the clock in reality. And all that being said, I have SMU winning 31-20. I think the defense is going to be able to, like you said, one-dimensional. I like SMU's front seven to slow down BYU enough on the run game, and I don't trust Jake Retzlaff enough to go out and have a 300-plus yard passing game that he would need to, kind of supplement that. So I think this matchup, at least for SMU's defense versus BYU's offense, I really like that matchup. And if you could keep that score low from BYU, that means I think SMU can have enough playmaking opportunities to win this one and move to 3-0. What do you think about the red jerseys, though?
I'm a big fan of them, man. I got my red on right now. This is one of the few remains from the Chad Morris era of gear that I got. We wore them my freshman year. I was a huge fan of them, and then when Sonny came in, he kind of lost the red a little bit. Went more to the traditional, brought out the Dallas, though. I will give him credit for that at least. But I like the red. I grew up in a red high school or a red town. And so I'm a big fan of the red. And I think they did them very, very well done this time around.
All right. We'll get to some of the questions here on the board. We did talk about a couple of them on the board as well. We'll show a couple pictures here in a second. But the first one comes from Pony Excess. And we did kind of talk about this, so you can take as long as you'd like or as little. But ask Hayden, based on what you've seen so far, can we stack up in the trenches against BYU? I'm most worried about our O-line. Can we establish a running game? We need to take pressure off of Preston and make his job easier. Long, sustained drives will be crucial.
You must have found my pregame notes. I definitely think that SMU has what it takes to be able to go out and get this done. I think our offensive line is the most talented and I think the most hard-nosed that it's been in the last few years, where I think we're going to be able to stack up fine. I don't think this is the best BYU defensive line that we've seen. It's definitely a good one. Don't get it twisted. This defensive end is going to give us some problems if we don't go out and play with great technique and effort. But I think as long as we are able to establish the run early and we're able to get those chunk plays going, your explosives, but you also have to be okay with your 3-4 yard rushes, I think we're going to be fine. I think Justin Osborne did a great job at right tackle this past week. He's done a great job of really throwing his hands. It's like Landon Stone hands with him. And it's the same with Savion Byrd, an extremely strong individual. I think these guys are built for the task at hand and that they're going to be out and go take care of business.
We'll skip over Stang's 2019 question,
please.
although it might be one to get answered on the Boulevard sometime or catch Hayden during the game in person. But we'll move along to FW Silver. Are the receivers getting separation, or is the quarterback not seeing them? Seems like limited production from the wide receivers this year. How do you compare? Well, we'll wait on the next question. So there you go. Are the receivers getting separation, or is the QB not seeing them? I guess
I would say, I would say they might not be getting as much separation as they have in years past, but I also think we've been spoiled by the amount of draft pick wide receivers that have come out of this program. We don't have a top round draft pick receiver like we did with Cortland Sutton, or Rashee Rice or James Prochet, where he's just such a pure route runner. He can get open no matter what. Obviously RJ Maryland is a great pass threat for us. And your top wide receivers typically draw safeties away from other players, which opens up the other routes. It's the same thing with a good defensive end. You're going to draw chips. You're going to draw the slide from the offensive line where we'll come up there and, hey, slide 99, where it's going to create a man side on the other side where they're able to run games and even win their one-on-ones and get home that way. So I think the more that a receiver can develop for us and be able to become a number one target, the better everyone else is going to look.
How do you compare this year's defense to last year's? It seems like last year's defense was faster and more aggressive. Thoughts?
I would say there's not enough film yet for that defense as a whole. 3 bad quarters in week 0 and then only 1 half against an FCS team is all we really have to go on so far. If anything, I think this defense is just as talented as last year's, and Scott Simons will get them going, and he's going to have some nasty stuff drawn up this week. Our corner room has a little bit of maturing to do. I hope we go out in the future and get a transfer portal lockdown corner or develop one of the guys that's already in there into a serious player for us. But Brandon Stevens is a guy that we developed into a great corner. He didn't come in as this lockdown guy that everyone knew was going to be no fly zone on his side of the field. I mean, he was a freaking running back, and he came in and was a great corner for us and now is a face of the Baltimore Ravens defense.
I'll say this about the defense. You have the entire safety room back. You have the entire major group of contributors at linebacker, and they're all in their second year in the system and a year older. You have a defensive line that's more talented and filled with depth. I mean, you can't really argue that. And I would say Jordan Miller was outstanding last year and Elijah Chapman was outstanding last year. But as a whole, they've got more depth. They've got more talent. It's just about putting it all together. And there are so many new faces and they are rotating so much. It's hard to do. But also, last year's group, I feel like, was playing against the American and they were dominating. It was a little unfair at times. And I would say this defense hasn't played bad. I think they got left out to dry after the first quarter of the Nevada game. They were on the field so much. They got, dealt a bad hand by special teams. It's not as bad as people say. And then you couple that with, Nevada's quarterback being a runner, they had to, rear back and not rush the passer. I'm with you, though. There definitely is not enough film to say better, worse, or whatever yet.
For sure.
So, yeah. On to the next. All right. Do you want the pictures first or last, or do you want them in order, or do you
go ahead and we'll go as I'm talking about them. So okay. The question from Stangs 2019 is, which one of these was a tougher film session? And it's 2 pictures. So Billy, if you could throw the first one up. Yeah. So 2020, first game after COVID, the whole world was shut down. We go to Texas State with a right guard who should have never been in the game. And I'm not going to throw this guy under the bus by name. If you followed the program long enough, you'll know who I'm talking about. But he was a guy that really was forced into a starting role because of his size and everything that we were able to do to get him in recruiting. You know, we were able to land him over other big time programs. And unfortunately, everyone in the O-line room, other than the O-line coach at the time, knew that he would be a liability. But with his monstrous size and all that, there was just that upside. Well, what if he goes out and plays great? So on that play, it's a 4-man slide. That's the nose guard actually about to murder Shane Buechele right there. He was supposed to be in the slide and just had a mental bust right there. So really not horrible for the unit as a film session, just horrible for him. And then this second photo, so this is the 2018 season finale at Tulsa, a game that I would prefer to forget about, but since we brought it up, I'll go ahead and cover it. So this is the freeze play that we had built in that year. So what it was is we would go, hey, you know, freeze, whatever our code word was for it, and it would be a hard count. So the quarterback would get up, he would clap, he would do everything he could to draw them off sides. If they jumped in the neutral zone, the center would snap the ball. So they jumped in the neutral zone, we snapped it. Nobody moves because there was a built-in throwback screen off of this. As you can see, the tight end staying in. It was going to be quarterback rolls out to the right, throwback screen back to the left. Unfortunately, quarterback took a bad sack for like a 25-yard loss, and we look around for the flag because they were obviously in the neutral zone, and no flag was thrown. So terrible to watch on film. Really kind of makes me squirm looking at this right now, but an unfortunate circumstance in that one.
As we talked about on your first episode, a galvanizing moment, if you will, for the turnaround of SMU football, though, I would say.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that 2018 December was like military boot camp. We came in after not making a bowl game. We took our mandated week off, you know, by the NCAA when the season's over, and the strength staff got after us. I mean, it was brutal. I mean, guys were legitimately talking like, hey, I might quit after today. And that sucks when you're going through it. It's something that's really hard. It's really challenging physically and emotionally, but it made people better. Guys hit the portal, or whatever it was back then, because I don't think the portal was a thing at that time. Guys got up and left, or, you know, decided they didn't want to play football anymore. And frankly, it was better for us. You know, we had a backup center that was nipping at my heels during the 2018 season who ended up quitting, and we were able to get somebody better to fill his role. So it made the team better. It definitely was a galvanizing moment. As far as which one is harder to look at, the top one probably makes me more angry because everyone knew that it was going to be a liability, and we still put him out there and almost lost us that game.
The next question is, as I'm looking on my phone here, computer's messing up, but all right. Couchum, I'd appreciate all explanations, getting more technical with the hows and whys. I know that could be difficult on audio, but if a guy got beat, why? Did X wrong, overpowered, should have put his hands in a blank spot, but didn't, scheme issue, why? I guess that's feedback. And we're going to try to do more of that. We're going to try to figure out how to get game film on and things like that. And we might do those as standalone videos with Hayden. I think that's what we're working on overall. But thanks for the feedback. And then Prairie Peruna, what kinds of conversations, if any, does an offensive lineman have with the refs throughout a game? Is it a constant, hey, you missed that, hands to the face as a gamesmanship, or do you generally let the coaches try to handle that and keep quiet?
So it depends. When I was a multi-year starter for SMU, I knew all the referees in the American Conference, you know, especially with playing a little bit of center, you know, the head referee pretty much I always knew. So there were times where I would catch a hands to the face or something like that, and I'd be like, hey, Keith, did you see that, man? You know, and he's like, no, what happened? And you can have a conversation with that as long as it's respectful. You can't go over all hot, you know, and cursing up a storm with them, because they're not going to react to that. And if anything, calls are going to go against you if you get on their bad side. So you just have to be respectful about it. And really, if you're going to blow up about it, you let the head coach get after him at that point.
What can Garen Justice and the coaches do to protect Andrew Chambly as he gets back up to speed against BYU? Are there blocking schemes that are more conservative or push help to his side that will be prioritized?
I don't think he should be in the game if he's not ready to go, is what I'll say. You need a guy that you know is going to be able to go out there and get it done. And if he's not healthy, then there's nothing wrong with sitting him for the week. I think PJ Williams and JO are more than capable enough to go out and get the job done at tackle. Now, would we like to have him out there? Sure. But you also don't want to put a guy out there in a bad spot coming off of an injury to where either A, he gets more injured, or B, it ends up costing you because he can't go at his full potential. So I don't really think there's anything that this offense can do to protect him per se, because I think that would just limit the offense overall. So for SMU to keep winning, if he's not ready to go, he needs to stay on the sidelines. But like we talked about in the previous episode, I thought he looked good this past week against Houston Christian. It looks like he's ready to go, but I'm not in the building with him every day, so I'm not 100% sure.
I agree. He looked solid. His last question is, it seems like all NFL teams now, NFL and college football, have no qualms about shuffling around the lines and throwing a right guard into right tackle or center to left guard. But in reality, how much does that suck? And why are all the big bodies treated like swappable players? Feels like you'd be better off putting a second string left guard in for an injured left guard starter rather than putting an established center into the left guard spot just because he's also a starter.
So this has been a constant battle on the board of people kind of asking, hey, you know, why is it so difficult for guys to move around the offensive line? So a way that I've related it is try to write with your offhand. That's what it's like if you're a lifetime left guard trying to play right guard. So it's just completely backwards. It's foreign to people. You're having to switch your feet, switch your hands, you know, and it completely kind of throws off your game if you don't practice it. It's something that has to be learned over time. It's not something that can be hey, you know, this week we're just going to throw you at right tackle. You know, I know you've never done it before, but you'll be fine. So it's something that needs to be developed over time. I don't know why they're treated like swappable players. I guess it's just a lack of experience. You know, I think it takes an offensive lineman who's done it before to really appreciate it. You know, I was thrown in at left tackle in the last preseason game of my career. And even though I'm a left guard, typically tackle is just completely different. You know, it's the same with guard and center, even though they're more similar, you know, between snapping and then pulling. Guard is more like tackle. Tackle is its own deal. So the farther out you get, I would say the more physically challenging it is. And the farther in you get, the more mentally challenging it is.
And then when you look at the offensive lineman, or actually SF to Hilltop, just watch the Michigan scandal on Netflix. How often do you think that happens? The documentary makers make it seem like it is widespread.
I never heard anything about it. We weren't in the meetings watching other teams' signals or anything like that. I mean, I think SMU would put a hit on me if I said that we were, but we actually weren't. I mean, it's just one of those things that I'm sure it is happening at other programs besides Michigan, but we weren't sending anybody to go watch a TCU game and film their signals or anything like that. I do think it was just a one person ordeal for the Michigan Wolverines, but it just happens. I mean, in baseball, they teach you to steal signs in high school, so I just don't really think it's part of college football right now.
So Cal Pony, Hayden, which two offensive linemen are you the most impressed with so far, and why?
I'm going to say the three. So I'm going to give credit to Ja'Kai Clark, Justin Osborne, and then I'm going to give credit to PJ. I know PJ has probably not as impressed as much as we had anticipated preseason, but he had such a great spring and a great training camp. I know once he gets into midseason form, he's going to look like a lockdown tackle for us. And then
Stangs 2019, what were the biggest differences you saw between coaching staffs? I guess you've got three to break down.
So I really have three. I mean, Coach Lashley was only there for the last 2 weeks of my SMU career. But I did have him as an offensive coordinator. So I signed under Chad Morris, in the pony up tempo era. And it was, I would just say it's not as high level from a management perspective of the program. And what I mean by that is we would come in after training camp to tomato soup and sandwiches. And then when Coach Dykes took over, the nutrition just took over a whole new level where it really was a huge difference maker for us that guys were getting the right nutrition that they needed. I think the training was better. under Coach Dykes. I would say scheme-wise, we did a lot of the same things on offense, and then I would say defense struggled under both staffs. So that seemed very similar, but I don't know. When you get older, you also just kind of have more of a good feeling about the staff as an older guy than you are as a freshman. I spent 4 years with Coach Dykes versus Coach Morris. I don't hate either of them. You know, they both left. They're both good dudes. I hate what they both did. You know, I think that was some chicken shit, you know, how they both left. And Billy, you can bleep that out if you want. No, but it's I'll talk more about that TCU week.
Yeah. Yeah. We both got some. I've got some good stories about both. So anyway, last question, one on a lighthearted one. 2018 Mustang. Who has the softest hands? Ben Hicks, Shane Buechele, or Tanner Mordecai?
I would say I played the most center with Ben, but I played some center with all of them. I mean, the quarterback, I'll spin it this way. My favorite quarterback I played with was probably Buechele, followed closely by Tanner, just because I had 2 years with Shane and only one with Tanner. They're both great dudes. Ben, you know, was fine. I was a young guy. He was an older guy to me, so he wasn't super cool to me the whole time. So that's just kind of a weird deal with that. But
there are a lot of people that probably feel that way about Ben, but Ben was good to me. So that's all I've got on that. But look, we've got a fun one Friday night in Ford Stadium, and we'll have more questions next week to jump into. We'll have a bye week. We'll have to figure out what we're going to do. So much time for activities on the podcast, and we're going to have some fun Friday night.
Yes, sir. Can't wait. 6 o'clock Friday night. BYU Cougars come to town. Excited to watch the SMU Mustangs hopefully get to 3-0.
Awesome. Well, Hayden, thanks for stopping in. As always, we appreciate all the time, especially this week that you've spent and will be spending with us at On the Pony Express all season long. So for Hayden Howerton, I'm Billy Embody. We'll be right back with more On the Pony Express podcast previewing SMU-BYU. Stay tuned. And welcome back into the On the Pony Express podcast. I am Billy Embody. Now, happy to be joined by KSL Sports' own Mitch Harper. Mitch, appreciate you coming on the show. You've done it all for us this week. You've answered questions for our subscribers on our website. You've had Dean Rolski on, and now you get to return the favor, and we're bringing you on. So thanks for coming on with us.
Well, I appreciate it, Billy. I think this BYU-SMU matchup is going to be fun. I loved when this home-and-home series was scheduled, the history between these two programs, the few meetings that they've had. There's a great history between BYU and SMU in many respects. So, and then to make it a Power 4 stage now, it's pretty awesome. So I'm excited to be here.
And SMU is looking for that first win in program history over BYU. And so the series is great. I think these programs, you know, have delivered some great games. SMU's trying to get on the right side of it. BYU opened its season with a convincing win over Southern Illinois. Let's go back to that game. SMU now has 2 under its belt, but BYU opened the season. What were some of the things you wanted to see from them? And then how did that, you know, compare to what they actually put out on the field in that 41-13 win?
I wanted to see BYU perform at a high level offensively, because last year in their opener against Sam Houston and to a lesser extent Southern Utah, the offense was not explosive. I mean, BYU had no games last season more than 400 yards. Last week, 527 yards. And the catalyst behind that was Jake Retzlaff. And, you know, Retzlaff was in a starting quarterback battle with former Baylor transfer Gary Bohannon, who Rhett Lashley noted he's familiar with him. Arkansas native Bohannon is from Earl, Arkansas. And he's going to have a lot of family at the game this week. But those two made each other better. And, you know, Bohannon's health with the shoulder, he was coming back. He performed at a high level. And so Retzlaff had to be at his best to win the job. And his explosive playmaking ability through the air last week was a pleasant surprise. You know, he was, by some recruiting outlets, the number 1 JC quarterback prospect in the 2023 cycle. I kind of take that with a little bit of grain of salt now, because JUCO's not as deep as it once was, say, 10, 15 years ago, but still number 1 in his class in that area of football. And so there was, expectations for Jake to be something good at BYU. And he kind of gave you a glimpse as to why the coaches wanted him, put him on scholarship, and made him a guy that they feel could be QB1. And he had a strong performance against the Salukis.
And most of the time when I look at BYU and some of the scores that maybe are a little out of hand, I would expect it to be a little flipped, over 300 yards rushing, maybe 100 something through the air. Is that, passing attack, is that a concerted effort this year, just kind of how the game played out, or is it just kind of a change in direction for the program?
BYU's identity has always been passing the football, and the best BYU teams ever have always been a ratio of about 60-40, 60 pass, 40 run. Coming into this season, Aaron Roderick, the offensive coordinator for BYU, made it clear they wanted to be a violent ground attack. Years ago when they had recently Tyler Algier, who's now with the Falcons, Jamal Williams, who's now with the New Orleans Saints, Chris Brooks, all NFL guys under Kalani Sitake, they had good ground attacks. And last year was non-existent in the Big 12. It was probably the worst rushing attack in the Big 12. So that was an area of focus. But personnel-wise, BYU's strength is at wide receiver, and they feel pretty good about the quarterback position. Throw the football. And they got a good offensive line that in recent years, despite some of their struggles, have been okay in pass blocking too. So I think that passing the football should always be a strength and a calling card of BYU, but that run game is something that they will work in as well. And they want that to operate at a high level, but the passing attack should be its core identity for this team.
49 times on the ground. That is something that a lot of teams across college football will look at and say, all right, better buckle the chin straps up this week. What's your kind of impression of how BYU views SMU's defense, the challenges it presents, and what, if any, they've talked about the changes since when they played them 2 years ago in that bowl game?
Yeah, the talk of the front seven, revamped with all the transfer portal additions. BYU's been well aware of the talent that Rhett Lashley has put together on that defense. And even Aaron Roderick noted this week that this is a big step up compared to Southern Illinois. And Southern Illinois was, top 4 in the FCS ranks last year, but they lost a ton of key personnel. So this is really going to be the first real test for BYU's offense, because, they haven't beat a Power 4 team and since October last year, against Texas Tech. And I know SMU's looking for a coveted Power 4 win as well. So this is a game where both teams are really maybe looking at a barometer here to really kind of shape what their seasons are going to be, this season. So I think BYU has a lot of respect for SMU's talent. But I think BYU does have in the trenches offensive line wise, they're more physical this year. Last year, they were a weak offensive line. Caleb Etienne, the left tackle, he had his best game as a BYU Cougar last week. He's a former Oklahoma State transfer. He was a standout last week. He was a standout in fall camp too. They switched him over from right tackle to left. He's going to be someone to keep an eye on. He's key to BYU's success this season.
Jacob Richardson and what he brings to that BYU defense, I think a Jim Thorpe Award semifinalist. How big of a piece is he just overall for this BYU team, and how does he change what Jay Hill and that defensive staff can do when you have a lockdown corner like that?
He's a standout player, and only one target to his side of the field last week and one interception. So he makes plays, and he's added a little bit of weight to his frame. He feels like he's a more physical defensive back this season, but he's been someone that Jacob Robinson, who can swing a game and get a pick six and get some. He can create points on the defensive side for BYU, and that's a nice luxury for this team. And he's someone that I feel could be one of the 4 best cornerbacks in the Big 12, and there's some good ones in the league this year. But I think Robinson's near the top. He's a really good player for BYU.
I look at that front line that BYU has on the defensive line, and you look at Tyler Batty, Isaiah Bagna, and those guys are key for the Cougars up front. What does this front present, and what are some of the trademarks of how they play? I was talking with the former SMU offensive lineman on our podcast this week, and he was talking about how, there's a lot of different things that BYU does to really change how offensive linemen have to prepare for him. So it was an interesting conversation. But what is the staples and trademarks of this defensive line group for the Cougars?
They're really strong there's a physical defensive line. Tyler Batty, you brought up him. He had 27 snaps last week. Southern Illinois only ran the ball to his side of the field once. So his stats, they were non-existent because they didn't go to his side of the field. He was someone last year that drew a lot of double teams because really the rest of the defensive line didn't do much. He had 5.5 sacks a season ago. BYU as a team had only 11. There's been a big storyline coming into this year. Can BYU generate pressure? Last year, their havoc rate was about 14%. This week after week 1, 21%. There's a big uptick, but that was against an FCS team, and that was similar metrics last year after week 1. Blake Mangelson and John Nilsson in the interior are key for BYU's success. John Nilsson, they're underrated guys. They're former defensive ends, but they're really good athletes. And it's interesting. They came to BYU as almost developmental project athletes that were, about 240 pounds. They've added a ton of weight over the course of their careers at BYU, and they've kind of still maintained that rangy athleticism, even being at 280 for Mangelson, 290 for John Nilsson. So those guys are strong, but there's some questions in the depth in the interior. If they have to dig into that second, third unit, we'll see how they perform. There's some real questions, but the DNs, they feel like they've got about 4 or 5 guys that they can rotate in and out. There's an interesting one in true freshman Ephraim Asiata, number 44. Keep an eye out for him. He's kind of one that they dial up some heat whenever he comes on the field. He's going to be one where they're bringing some pressure. So, BYU's got an improved defensive line with a lot of experience, but there's still this case of how do they perform, week after week against this level of competition, and that's going to be the challenge. And starts with this Friday night.
You mentioned the sacks and some of the pressure that BYU is trying to dial up in our Q&A on theponyexpress.com. What are the differences you're seeing in some of that havoc that they're trying to create? And do you think that this group is, a little bit more better equipped to improve upon that 11 sack mark from last year?
There's a greater understanding of the defense. Jay Hill's defensive scheme is complex. He throws a lot at these guys. And, in retrospect, last year, I think this team their head was spinning at times where they didn't have a full grasp of the scheme. And, so I think that's helping the cause too. And I also believe that they just got better personnel all around. They did focus a lot on continuity. BYU was, in the top 3 of fewest pickups in the transfer portal, the opposite of SMU, where they focus just solely on roster retention and player development. They've improved their NIL war chest, if you will, but still it wasn't to get guys from other schools. It was just to maintain the roster. So they did a good job there. And, but they did get one guy from the portal that has been a key difference maker, and he was the leading tackler a week ago, Jack Kelly. And Rhett Lashley pointed out the speed at linebacker. It's because of him. He can do a lot of different things on BYU's defense. They could line him up at defensive end, that OE spot, outside edge, linebacker. He can drop back in coverage. He is a all-around playmaker for BYU on defense. And it's interesting because he came from just Weber State, the FCS ranks. You wouldn't think much of him, but Jay Hill obviously coached him up, recruited him, and they have a lot of belief in him. He's one of the strongest players in the program. He's a really good football player, and he missed opportunities last week. He could have had a better stat line than what he ended up with 5 tackles, and I think, half a tackle for loss. So Jack Kelly's one to keep an eye on, number 17.
Who are some of the X factors on this BYU team, both sides of the ball? Who do they need to, have a day, so to speak, if they're going to come into Dallas and win?
Chase Roberts at wide receiver. He's in his 4th year in the program, a redshirt junior, and he is taking a big step forward, I think, in his development. He had 7 catches, I think 107 yards a week ago, 8 targets. It was interesting this week. Kalani Sitake noted that they feel like they're utilizing him like they did Puka Nacua, who's an LA Rams star. And Puka was a special player when he was healthy for BYU in his 2 seasons when he transferred in from Washington. So that's kind of the high respect. BYU is interesting that you look across their team outside of Batty and to a lesser degree Robinson. There's not many guys that kind of conjure up the star label. It's a lot of maybe they could be that, but I do believe Roberts is that guy on the offense. I also think running back LJ Martin, he's one to keep an eye on. I know that the carries were pretty split between him and Hinckley Ropati, but as the season continues to progress and his shoulder continues to get healthier, I mean, he looked good last week. I fully expect that he's going to become that feature if you will, bell cow back for BYU in the backfield. I think he could be someone that has a big production. He's from El Paso, West Texas. So I'm sure, just playing in the state of Texas, I think will mean a lot to him going to Dallas. And defensive side, we talked about Robinson, Jack Kelly, Batty. Another one I'd keep an eye on is Micah Harper. He plays a little bit of nickel, can also go to strong safety. He's a hard-hitting safety. He played his first game action last week since coming back from an ACL injury in 2023. He missed all of last year. Really good football player. He's one to watch as well on the back end of the defense.
All right. How do you see this game playing out? What are the keys for the Cougars? What are the keys, as far as trying to get out ahead of what SMU is going to try to do? And do you have a prediction?
I think, SMU is going to probably try to utilize their speed on the edges early against BYU. I think BYU's got to set the tone with the physicality and score early. There were the games last year with Jake Retzlaff on the road. BYU had some success against Oklahoma State where they built a little bit of a lead and they, had a cushion, but they're just still, they didn't have the ability to complete a game for a full 60 minutes. But I think for this team, they faced a lot of adversity, and I think there's a good mindset with this group. But I feel like setting the tone early will be critical for this group to get off to a fast start. So I think that's going to be a big key. I think BYU also has got to prevent turnovers. Jake Retzlaff put the ball, or the BYU offense at large, they didn't have any turnovers last week, but they put the ball on the turf twice. Jake Retzlaff has a tendency to get a little greedy sometimes. He's got to be smart with his decisions and not, try to get an extra few yards on that quarterback keeper. He's got to take care of that football and throw into the correct passing lanes as well, because a lot more opportunistic defense, I would assume, here with SMU. Even though the secondary for the Mustangs, I feel like BYU could maybe attack and have some advantage, and they got to do that in this game. I just feel like this is going to come down to the wire, and this is a toss-up football game. I really like SMU's roster a lot, in the talent. I think they got a little bit more depth and talent overall than BYU. I'd say SMU by a field goal, but it wouldn't surprise me if BYU did spring the upset here, just because some of the issues, and you know better than me, Billy, but I mean, the SMU offensive line, I think BYU's defensive front could, exploit that maybe if they do. But it's a prove it. You got to show me before I can say confidently they're gonna do it. I mean, when you're a team that was 11 sacks a season ago, I just can't bank on that right now. There's momentum, sure, but they got to prove it. So I would slightly give the edge still to SMU by a field goal, but I will say too that week 0 performance and kind of the lack of discipline from SMU surprised me, and I just thought that BYU's gonna be disciplined, and they only had 3 penalties last week. And they are a mature football team. I know it's a cliche with BYU with the missions and things like that, but this group is mature. And so I think BYU won't beat themselves, but I like SMU's overall talent more. And I'll say SMU by 3 right now.
That's the hard part about this game is, and this season for SMU. Each team is different. They have tons of new pieces. They also have some nice returning pieces, but they haven't beaten a Power 4 opponent in over a decade at home, and they've, I think, only beaten TCU really in the past on the road. So it's a show me game for both programs, right? And BYU is trying to get back to bowl eligibility and get their season, on the right direction early on here. So it's a big game for them. SMU's offensive line, you mentioned that the trenches for me are where this game is going to be won or lost for SMU. If they come out, push around BYU, set a tone, that will carry them, I think. If SMU could start fast in this one, I think it'd go a long way to getting it done for them. I've got SMU 31-20. I just really like SMU's defense. And I don't know if you see it as a low scoring or a high scoring affair, but I think their defensive line is going to be able to do some things. Southern Illinois got a couple sacks. I don't know if you could shed a little last minute light on those, but that's kind of my read on this one.
Yeah, I see it being SMU 24, BYU 21. I think, BYU's got a history under Kalani where they spring upsets in the first month of the season. BYU in September, the last 4 years, they've had at least 3-1 starts. I mean, they get off to strong starts under Kalani. And last year they won on the road at Arkansas as an 8-point underdog where not many people expected them win that. They got down 14-0 and then won that one. So BYU is a good, they're always good for one big upset. And I think this would be a big upset for BYU and to help with their bowl eligibility cause. As far as the sacks go, there was one where the right tackle, Braden Keim, who's a really good player, kind of a freaky athlete, could be kind of a combine hero if he gets an invite next February or March. He just had a wrong decision. I mean, he just went inside, and then the edge rusher for Southern Illinois nothing went in front of him. He just had a clean look at Jake Retzlaff and got the sack. It was one that he clearly knew he made a mistake, but he's going to be a pretty good player for BYU. I don't think there's anything cause for concern there, but the talent is a big step up this week, and I'm very curious to see how BYU's O-line performs against SMU's defensive front, because that old offensive line for BYU, they brought in a new offensive line coach, TJ Woods. He's their run game coordinator. He's almost as critical as the offensive coordinator with the identity and the vision of this offense. He's coaching not only the O-line, but he works with the tight ends, the running backs, because he's the run game coordinator. So his voice is there with all these players on the offensive side. So that's an important piece too, the trenches for BYU.
It's going to be really interesting. A little Friday night action in the state of Texas, not high school. We're going college this time. ESPN2, 6 p.m. Central Time. SMU-BYU Mustangs looking for their first win over BYU in program history. Mitch Harper from KSL Sports, thanks so much for stopping by. We'll be seeing you because this is a series as well.
That's right. Yeah, I'll be there Friday night in the press box, so I look forward to seeing that. But then 2027 in Provo, it'll be great to have all the SMU fans come back. First time since the weird WAC 16-team WAC days, but it's going to be a good time. I can't wait.
We're looking forward to it, and we're looking forward to bringing you all of our game coverage at ontheponyexpress.com. So thanks for listening to this edition of the On the Pony Express podcast. We'll catch you guys post-game as the Mustangs look to topple the Cougars. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you guys after the game.
Thanks for listening to the On the Pony Express podcast with Billy Embody. Follow us on your socials on X at SMU-on3 and on Instagram at On3SMU. And keep it locked to ontheponyexpress.com for more coverage.